Of today's Senate session. Members will be considering the nomination of Nina Pillard to a seat on the D.C. Circuit Court to fill the second of 3 vacancies there. We may also see speeches today on the bipartisan budget agreement announced last night. Live Senate coverage.
The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, your kingdom will never end. Abide with our senators, and may they find favor with you. Lord, remind them that because of your omnipotence, nothing is impossible for you. May their reverence for you provide them this day with a foundation of wisdom that will enable people everywhere to live in peace, untroubled by fear of harm. Teach our lawmakers to treasure your commands, to walk with integrity, and to do what is right, just, and fair. May their relationship with you be like the first light of dawn, which shines even brighter until the full light of day. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., December 11, 2013. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Martin Heinrich, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I now move to proceed to calendar number 243.
Clerk will report the motion.
Motion to proceed to the consideration of calendar number 243, S. 1356. A bill to amend the Workforce Investment Act of 1998 to strengthen the United States workforce development system, and so forth and for other purposes.
Following my remarks, Mr. President, those of the Republican leader, the Senate will resume consideration of the nomination of Nina Pillard to be United States Circuit Judge for the D.C. Circuit. Mr. President, I am told S. 1797 is due for a second reading. Is that valid?
Clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
S. 1797, a bill to provide for the extension of certain unemployment benefits and for other purposes.
I would object, Mr. President, to any further proceedings with this bill at this time.
Objections heard. The bill will be placed on the calendar under Rule 14.
Thank you. Mr. President, I congratulate the budget negotiators on reaching agreement last night to roll back the painful and arbitrary cuts of sequestration and prevent another dangerous government shutdown in the new year. Their bargain also protects Medicare and Social Security benefits and reduces the deficit. That's a good package. I commend Budget Chairman Murray and her House Republican counterpart, Congressman Paul Ryan, for their diligence and cooperative spirit which made this agreement possible. The process that led to this accord was long and very difficult. The Republican government shutdown, the first in 17 years, took a toll on our economy, American families, and our reputation around the world. It was also costly for the federal government in many different ways. So when Congress reached a temporary settlement and ended the short-sighted shutdown, Democrats were committed to ending the terrible cycle of lurching from crisis to crisis. But, Mr. President, understand this. When this measure went to the House of Representatives. It passed here to keep open the government after 16 days, stop the government from defaulting on its debt for the first time in history. About 75% of the Republicans in the House voted to keep the government closed and to default on the debt. Think about that. So this agreement is really a breath of fresh air. And as we've been committed to setting sound fiscal policy through the regular order of the budget process and not through hostage-taking or crisis-making. In this new agreement, neither side got everything it wanted. But that's how it used to work around here, Mr. President. That's how it worked. Each side would move forward on what they wanted. And they would recognize sometimes it was soon, sometimes it wasn't so soon, that the only way to work something out is to work together. That's what happened here. So, Mr. President, this is I repeat, a breath of fresh air for the country. But I also hope it's a view of the future. I hope it's a view of the future. For example, I believe, as many Democrats do, that an extension of emergency unemployment insurance should be included in this package. I'm very disappointed that the bills posted by the House last night do not include that. About 20,000 Nevadans who have been unemployed for more than 6 months, and more than 1 million people nationwide will lose their earned unemployment benefits at the end of this year, unless Congress acts. I'll stand up for those Americans who want to get back to work as soon as possible, but face a market where there's only 1 job opening for every 3 unemployed workers. That's why we're going to push here after the first of the year for an extension of unemployment insurance when the Senate convenes after the new year, as I will also work very hard to raise the minimum wage. It was stunning, Mr. President. There are reports all over the national media today, radio, television, all the print media, that the vast majority of Americans believe the minimum wage should be raised to $10 an hour. American people believe if someone works for 40 hours, they shouldn't be on the rating as being poor. They should be able to support themselves and their family. But that isn't the way it is now. We need to raise the minimum wage, and there will be a sustained effort to do that when we come back. Mr. President, Democrats, led by Senator Murray, stood up for our party's priorities, protecting the middle class and growing the economy. But we were also ready and willing to compromise with our Republican counterparts. I admire Senator Murray for having proceeded forward along this line. But while both sides made concessions and sacrifices, I repeat, that's the nature of negotiation. And the point of conference committee is to work together to work out our differences. So to their credit, members of the conference committee considered every option, no matter how painful to their own political party. They rejected many, they rejected most. They were able to come together on enough revenue and enough cuts to come up with this pact that they have. Under the leadership of Chairman Murray, the committee crafted a 2-year bargain that charts a course for economic growth, maintains fiscal responsibility, and perhaps most importantly, averts another manufactured crisis that would undercut the economic process that we've made and the progress we've made these last 4 years. So I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the Capitol to pass this agreement. Last night we also filed, I shouldn't say we, last night the House filed a bill to ensure physicians are fairly compensated so Medicare patients can continue to see their doctors. It would be a shame if Medicare patients didn't have the ability to have a doctor. But this, unless we did this agreement, short-term as it is, physicians would receive a 27% cut in pay. So again in the new year, we're going to work very hard to get rid of this so-called doc fix once and for all. We need to fix it once and for all. Mr. President, unfortunately, instead of beginning work on either of these things that I've talked about and the 2 agreements, that is, fix for doctors, Medicare patients, the budget, the defense bill, which I haven't talked about, which also was posted last night in the House. Republicans are not facing reality. They're not. You are seeing, the American people are seeing before their eyes the face of obstruction. That's what's going on right now. We're eating up days of time, wasting hours, weeks, and days. Now, we could be voting on all this stuff now. All these nominations are appearing before this body now, and move on to substantive issues. This is why the rules were changed, Mr. President. You can see it right now. We are wasting hour after hour doing nothing. Mr. President, the filibuster rule was established to get legislation passed. As it relates to nominations, the same thing applies, to get nominations processed. And our predecessors in the Senate set some rules saying that if cloture is invoked, the parties are entitled to some time to make their case before final passage or final vote on the nomination. So now we have a number of nominations we're processing. To show how shallow the Republicans' obstructionism is, they have no objections to any of these nominations. Nobody comes and giving these fire and brimstone speeches about how bad these people are. Why? Because they're not. They've just been stalling and stalling. I repeat, this is the face of obstruction which we've been facing for 5 years during the Obama administration. Is it any wonder that the rule was changed that relates to nominations? We were spending all of our time trying to get the president to have a team rather than doing work on substantive legislation. So, Mr. President, we'll see how late we have to work tonight. Whatever it is, we're going to do it. We're going to finish these nominations this week. If it goes into Friday, it goes into Saturday, that's what we're going to do. We have to get this done. Now, Christmas is approaching, and I understand that. We all understand that. But this session of Congress does not end at Christmas time. We have work to do. We have to pass this budget. We have to do something for those Medicare patients. We have to do something for the military of this country with this defense agreement that has been reached between the leaders of those two important committees, Armed Services and the counterpart in the House, whatever it's called. So, Mr. President, why waste this time? There is no reason to do this. Republicans are stalling. For what? To stop these nominations from going forward? They're going to go forward with a simple majority vote. I understand one of them may not go forward because some Democrats don't like the nominee, but that's the way it should be. So we could confirm Nina Pillard right now. No one's saying a single word contrary to her being the quality candidate that we have said she is. She's the District of Columbia Appeals Court. I repeat, some say the most important court in America. Most say second only to the Supreme Court. But instead, Republicans are insisting that we vote on her nomination many hours from now, after they've frittered away 30 hours of the Senate's time. There are no objections to her qualifications. The outcome of her vote is a foregone conclusion. So when people around here complaining that they aren't home with their families at Christmas time, here is the reason. Republicans' obstruction. It's hard to imagine a more pointless exercise than spending hour after hour after hour waiting for a vote whose outcome we already know. Republicans insist on wasting time simply for the sake of wasting time. Is it any wonder, I repeat, that the rule was changed? Here is why. It's no wonder Americans overwhelmingly support the changes made to the rules last month in order to make the Senate work again. The Republicans' partisan sideshow is another example of the kind of blatant obstruction that has ground the Senate to a halt. The work of the Senate has come to a standstill over the last 5 years. Members should be aware that if Republicans start squandering the Senate's precious time, roll call votes are possible at any time this afternoon or this evening. It doesn't have to be like this. With just a little bit of cooperation, we could hold votes in a timely manner so we can move on with the business before us. Unfortunately, we cannot schedule votes without cooperation. That's part of the Senate rules, and cooperation is in short supply at the moment.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Cornelia T.L. Pillard of the District of Columbia to be United States Circuit Judge.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
I just listened to the Majority Leader complaining about what we're doing this week. He's the one in charge of the schedule. He's spending a week here on non-essential nominations, none of which are emergencies, all of which could be handled later. And it was his choice to spend the week on nominations that are not emergencies as opposed to doing things like passing a DOD authorization bill or things like taking up a budget resolution or things like doing a farm bill. So the Majority Leader has a choice as to what we're going to spend time on, and he's chosen to spend this week on 10 nominations. Now, yesterday I talked about the left's ends justify the means quest for power and the lengths to which they're willing to go to satisfy it. The Obama administration and its allies have done just about everything to get what they want, one way or the other, even fundamentally altering the contours of our democracy when they couldn't get their way by playing by the rules. We saw the culmination of that with the Majority Leader's power grab in the Senate last month. The real-world consequences of that power grab are most sharply illustrated by the very nominee before us, which I believe I heard the Majority Leader commenting on what a stellar nominee this person is. Well, Professor Pillard may be a fine person, but she's not someone who should receive a lifetime position on the second highest court in the land. She'll be confirmed, however, because of the Democratic majority's power grab a couple of weeks ago. So let's take a look at her legal views. They certainly make one thing clear. The nominee before us is a liberal ideologue. A liberal ideologue. In other words, just the kind of person this administration was looking for to rubber stamp its most radical legislative and regulatory proposals on the D.C. Circuit. Let's take the so-called Hosanna Tabor case. Last year, the Supreme Court reinforced a core First Amendment principle when it ruled unanimously that churches, rather than the government, could select their own leaders. Churches, rather than the government, could select their own leaders. Every single justice sided with the church's argument that in that case, every single one, it makes sense, freedom of religion is a bedrock foundation of our democracy. I think every member of this body would surely agree that the government doesn't have any business picking a group's religious leaders for them. But Professor Pillard seemed to have a very different view. Prior to the court's unanimous decision, she said the notion that, quote, the Constitution requires deference to church decisions about who qualifies as a minister, end quote, in the case before the court seemed, quote, like a real stretch. This is the nominee, after the power grab the Senate's about to confirm, who says that it's a real stretch that a church would be able to pick its own leaders. This is astonishing judgment from somebody who's about to end up on what we believe is the second most important court in the land. Oh, but she went on from that. The position of the church in the Hosanna-Tabor case, she said, represented a, quote, substantial threat to the American rule of law. How do you like that, Mr. President? It's a substantial threat to the American rule of law that a church should be able to pick its own leaders. A substantial threat to the American rule of law, and this was a case decided the other way from Professor Tabor, 9-0. Talk about radical. Talk about extreme. No wonder they wanted a simple majority to be available to confirm a nominee like this. I mean, even the court's most liberal justices, as I mentioned, disagreed with Professor Pillard on this one. One of them characterized that kind of position as amazing. This is a member of the Supreme Court in a 9-0 decision, characterizing Professor Pillard's view as amazing. In other words, Professor Pillard must think that even the furthest left Supreme Court justice isn't far left enough for her. So you get the drift, Mr. President, where she is. Now, we rightly expect justices on our nation's highest courts to evaluate cases before them with a judge's even-handed mindset, not the absolutism of an ideologue. But just listen. Listen to the kinds of things Pillard has said. Professor Pillard has expressed sympathy with the idea that the rights of our Constitution, the same Constitution she would be charged with upholding, have, quote, just about run out, end quote. That's Professor Pillard on the Constitution. The rights of our Constitution have just about run out. And this necessitates a shift toward international law. A shift toward international law. Apparently she feels the U.S. Constitution is no longer adequate and need to rely on foreign law to determine what we do here in this country. Pillard has said that abortion, essentially without limits, without any limits at all, is necessary to avoid, quote, conscription into maternity, end quote. Conscription into maternity. And that even common sense laws many American men and women support serve to, quote, enforce incubation, end quote. She's referred to the types of ultrasound images that are now available to so many proud moms and dads to be as, quote, deceptive images, end quote. Ultrasound is a deceptive image, according to Professor Pillard, perpetrated by the, quote, anti-choice movement, end quote. In other words, she appears to think that proud moms and dads to be shouldn't believe their own eyes when they look at the images science has made increasingly available to us over the past few years. It's an understatement to say that these sorts of views are worrying for someone the President wants on our nation's, one of our nation's top courts. In short, Professor Pillard does not seem like a person with the mindset or the temperament of a judge. She seems like a person with the attitude and disposition of a left-wing academic, someone who seems to come to conclusions based on how well they support her own theories. Mr. President, judges are charged with fairly evaluating the law that is actually before them, not the law as they wish it to be. So I'll be voting against the Pillard nomination. It's important to keep this in mind as well. Nearly every single Democratic senator voted to enable the majority leader's power grab last month. Those senators are responsible for its consequences. That includes the confirmation of Ms. Pillard, regardless of how they vote on her nomination. So I'd urge you to rethink the kind of nominees you bring to the floor moving forward, because now they're all yours. You're going to own every one of them. Simple majority, you own them. So, Mr. President, extremist nominees like Professor Pillard are the reason the President and Senate Democrats took the unprecedented step of going nuclear 2 weeks ago. They unilaterally changed more than 2 centuries of history and tradition and violated their own prior statements and commitments so nominees like this could rubber stamp the President's most left-wing agenda items. This is the playbook. Forget the rules, forget checks and balances, and certainly forget the will of the American people. Do whatever it takes to get the President's agenda through. The other side of this, of course, is that Democrats are determined to change the subject from Obamacare. Anything to change the subject. We now know that this President engaged in a serial deception in order to get his signature of health care bill enacted into law. The White House debated whether to tell the truth or not on whether folks would be able to keep the plans they have. And they decided not to tell the truth, a conscious decision to mislead the American people going back to 2009. Their view was the talking point was just too useful. They needed it in order to get what they wanted. So I'd probably be looking to change the topic too, if I were our friends on the other side of the aisle. Change the subject to Senate rules or nominees or anything else for that matter. The last thing the majority wants to talk about is Obamacare, because they own it 100%. Not a single Republican in the House or Senate voted for it. Every single Senate Democrat did. The problem is what Senate Democrats have done by going nuclear here in the Senate is really no different from what they did on Obamacare. Once again, they said one thing and did another. The majority leader said publicly and repeatedly he wouldn't break the rules, and then he did. He said he wouldn't break the rules, and then he did. As I said a couple of weeks back, he might as well have said, if you like your Senate rules, you can keep them. Well, here we are today. Here we are today, ready to watch Senate Democrats rubber stamp an extremely liberal nominee to a lifetime position. On a vote threshold, the majority leader, back when he was in the minority and supported minority rights in the Senate, said would be disastrous for our democracy. Exactly what the majority leader said when he was in my position, would be a disaster for our democracy. Anything it takes. Anything it takes. to get this president's agenda around the checks that the founders established to restrain majoritarian power. Anything it takes, anything, to get around anyone who disagrees with them, whether it's Obamacare or the judges they expect to defend it. Anything at all it takes, they're willing to do. And let me say it again. Nobody who supported this rules change can walk away from nominees like Professor Pillard or their rulings. They own them. But let's get back to Obamacare for a few minutes, because that's the issue the American people are most concerned about right now. That's the issue the Democrats want to distract us from. The American people should know what the liberal playbook is here. The left believes that the president's agenda runs straight through the D.C. Circuit Court. The president's agenda runs straight through the D.C. Circuit Court. That's why they pressured Democrats to change the rules of the Senate to pack this court with folks like Professor Pillard. The goal here is actually twofold. First, let's grease the skids for an agenda that can't get through Congress, then build a firewall around it by packing the court with your ideological allies. That way, Democrats can keep telling folks what they think they want to hear about Obamacare and anything else. But they can also rest assured that nobody's going to tamper with it. Nobody's going to tamper with it. All of this is in the context in which the national debate over Obamacare and its failures should be viewed. But none of it should distract us from what Obamacare is doing to our health care system or to millions, literally millions of ordinary Americans who've been suffering under its effects. Over the past couple of months, the American people have been witness to one of the most breathtaking indictments of big government liberalism in memory. And I'm not just talking about the website, the subject of late-night comedy. I'm talking about the way in which Obamacare was forced on the public by an administration and a Democrat-led Congress that we now know was willing to do and say anything to pass the law. They were willing to do or say anything. Here in the Senate, we had the Cornhusker kickback. We had the Gatorade. We had the Louisiana Purchase. And they finally got up to the 60 votes they needed. They had to get every single Democrat, and they got them any way it took. That coupled with the grossly misleading statement, if you have your policy and you like it, you can keep it. If you have your doctor and you like him or her, you can keep it. The Democrats were so determined to force their vision of health care on the public that they assured them they wouldn't lose the plans they had, that they'd save money instead of losing it, and they'd certainly been able to keep using the doctors and hospitals they were already using. And the stories we're hearing now on a nearly daily basis range from heartbreaking to comic. So Americans are really upset. You know, finally the big government crowd messed with an issue that affects every single American. In my state, they've shut down the coal industry, and that sure had a big impact by creating a depression in central Appalachia. But you could argue, you know, you can go after the coal industry because they're confined to certain areas of the country. But here they're messing with everybody. The one issue that every single American is affected by and cares about, their own health care. All these stunts do is the attention-getting stunts that the president's been engaged in. You can have those until you're blue in the face, but they don't change anything. All they do is remind folks of the way Democrats continue to set up one set of rules for themselves and another for everybody else. One set of rules for us and another set for everybody else, whether it's Obamacare or the IRS or the NLRB or pushing the button on the nuclear option. It's all basically the same debate. We're going to do what we're going to do. We don't care what the rules are. We'll break the rules. We'll do whatever it takes to get what we want. It's a party that's clearly willing to do and say just about anything to get its way. Anything. Millions of Americans are hurting because of a law Washington Democrats forced upon them. And what do they do about it? They cook up a fight over judges on a court that doesn't even have enough work to do. A court they were arguing a few years ago shouldn't have any additional members because it had a light workload, and now it has an even lighter workload. So look, we know what this is about. As I indicated, I'd want to be talking about something else too if I had to defend dogs getting insurance while millions of Americans lost theirs. But this isn't going to work. And the parallels between the latest move and the original Obamacare push are really all too obvious to ignore. The Majority Leader promised over and over again that he wouldn't break the rules of the Senate in order to change them. On July the 14th, he went on Meet the Press and he said, we're not touching judges. That was July 14th of this year. That echoed the promise he made back in January of this year. Sounds a lot like if you have your policy and you like it, you can keep it. Then there are the double standards. When Democrats were in the minority, they argued strenuously against changing the rules. And let's not forget about the raw power at play here. The American people themselves decided not to give Democrats the House or to restore the filibuster-proof majority they had in the Senate in the last two elections. An inconvenient truth for our friends on the other side. They don't own the place anymore. They did the first 2 years. 60 votes in the Senate, 40-seat majority in the House. Not anymore. American people took a look at that first 2 years and issued a national restraining order in November of 2010. But our friends don't want to be deterred by that. They're going to pursue their agenda through the courts and through the regulatory schemes the administration propounds. So they just change the rules of the game to get their way. I think it's pretty clear if you can write the rules of the game, you ought to be able to win them. Earlier this year, the senior senator from New York said Senate Democrats intended to, quote, fill up the D.C. circuit one way or another, end quote. Couldn't be any more clear than that. We'll do it one way or the other. So we break the rules and change the rules and do what we want to do. The arrogance of power on full display by an arrogant majority. On full display right here in the United States Senate. So our colleagues evidently would rather live for the moment and to try to establish a storyline that Republicans are, I just heard it here from the Majority Leader, Republicans are intent on obstructing President Obama's judicial nominees. A storyline that is patently ridiculous. I mean, you can keep saying things over and over again, but it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it true to keep saying the wrong thing over and over again. Here are the facts. Before this current Democratic gambit to fill up the D.C. circuit one way or the other, as a senior senator from New York said, the Senate had confirmed 215 judges and rejected two. Some provocation for breaking your word and breaking the rules of the Senate in order to change the rules of the Senate. That's a confirmation rate, by the way, of 99%. 99%. Republicans have been clearly willing to confirm the president's judicial nominees. On the D.C. circuit, we recently confirmed one 97-0. So the Democratic strategy of distract, distract, distract is getting old. It's not working. The American people are not listening to this ridiculous argument. They're worried about their health care. And they're angry at the people who caused them to lose their policies. In my state, 280,000 have lost their policies. And on the exchange, 26,000 have been able to get private policies. The rest of them are all Medicaid recipients. The Democratic playbook of broken promises, double standards, and raw power, the same playbook that got us Obamacare, has got to end. And with the help of the American people, we'll end it a year from now. Meanwhile, Republicans are going to keep pushing back to get back to the drawing board on health care, to replace Obamacare with real reforms that help rather than punish the middle class. Now, I'm, Mr. President, at this point going to refer to some constituent letters that I've gotten that I think the Senate would find noteworthy related to Obamacare. Here's a letter from a constituent in Bowling Green. I'm a 35-year-old college graduate and represent many hardworking middle-class Kentuckians who are being directly impacted by Obamacare. I'm a married father of 2 young children. We are, by most accounts, an average American family. Before Obamacare was passed, my family was insured through a health insurance policy purchased on the open market. We shopped several different policies and chose the one that was the best fit for our needs. Recently received a notice from our insurer that our plan didn't meet the requirements of the new health care law. According to the letter, we were required by law to be transitioned into a plan that did meet those new requirements. Also included in the letter was our new premium, and that shocked us. According to the letter, our premiums would be increased 124%, more than double what we had budgeted for this expense. According to a speech by the Vice President on September the 27th of this year, a family of 4 earning $50,000 a year could get coverage for as little as $106 a month. Should I have to pay 8 times that amount because my wife and I both work hard to provide for our family and earn more than the Vice President's limit of $50,000 a year? Why should the price of a product be based on my ability to pay? Very good question. Why should the price of a product be based upon my ability to pay? Would that work at the gas station? Should the price of a gallon of gas be decided by my income tax return? Or at the grocery store? Should the price of a gallon of milk be determined by my income tax return? Or in shopping for a home loan? Should the interest rate on my mortgage be higher if I earn more than $50,000 a year? This predatory pricing structure runs contrary to the basic American foundation principles of free enterprise and is illegal in every other marketplace. It should be illegal in health care, too. Larry Thompson from Lexington. My health plan that I've had for 10 years just got canceled. And the least expensive plan on the exchange, listen to this, is a 246% increase. That means hundreds of extra dollars per month we don't have. Obama lied and made a promise he couldn't keep when he said repeatedly that if we wanted to keep our current health care policy, we could. That's what Mr. Thompson from Lexington said. He has really affected our lives for the worse. Much worse. I am so mad. We must stop insurance companies from canceling policies now. And, of course, the reason they're having to cancel policies is because the law makes them. Sherry Harris from Nicholasville in my state. Did you know the Lake Cumberland Hospital in Somerset is not on the Anthem network, which means anybody in Pulaski and surrounding counties that qualify for a subsidy and want to use it will have to drive to London, Corbin, or Lexington to get care. Do you seriously believe when this comes to the attention of the citizens, they are going to appreciate you voting it back in the budget? Please be sure you know what you are voting for. It may be too late for you. I'm surprised you took that step instead of standing up for what is right. Harriet White from Rockville, which is in Warren County near Bowling Green. Dear Senator McConnell, I'm deeply upset because of the effect the Health Care Act has had on our family's health insurance. It's negatively impacted our finances and our quality of care. The President promised that if you had health care, you would not be impacted. The sad truth is that, like my coworkers, my deductible has doubled along with my premiums. The only way to be able to adjust is for us to either reduce or stop our 401k contributions. This is hardly affordable health care. I don't understand why such a blatant lie has been allowed to go this far. Do we not, as American citizens, have the right to choose basic services? I don't think the government should make choices for the people that impact us in such a negative way. Thank you for your time, and please keep fighting this gross abuse of power. Aaron McLemore from Louisville. Seeing as I'm a single male, 31, policy being canceled, by the way, with no kids or dependents, and I'm paying for pediatric dental care and maternity care, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. As a single male, age 31, having to pay for pediatric dental care and maternity care, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. He makes more than $100,000 a year and doesn't qualify for a subsidy on the Obama exchange. So this 31-year-old's current policy is being canceled. A new policy from the exchange will more than double his monthly premium and nearly double his yearly out-of-pocket maximum. His higher costs aren't subsidizing lower-income policyholders whose subsidies already been paid by the government, but he's providing a subsidy in another way. The new act requires him to buy a policy with features he doesn't need. Here's what he said: seeing as I'm a single male with no kids or dependents, and I'm paying for pediatric dental care and maternity care, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, he said. What Obamacare is doing is moving McLemore out of the individual market, where people are sorted by age and health history and scope of coverage, to a market more like the traditional employer-based group policy in which young and old workers get the same coverage and pay the same premium. Mr. and Ms. Spears from Louisville. I think you should know, they say, what's going on here in Kentucky with Connect. That's the website. I had to sign my wife up since our governor canceled all of our policies effective January 1, 2014. I signed up through the benefits firm advertising them that I wanted no subsidies since we have already paid our way in 42 years of marriage. He told me the full pay option of $517 per month and advised that no income verification was necessary since no subsidies were involved. So I chose the Kentucky co-op plan as I felt the monies would stay in Kentucky with this plan. He went on, Mr. President, he said, and then I received 4 mailings from Connect, one stating she was declined coverage unless I sent income verifications. Also one stating I have to fill out a voter registration and return as they have no information on my voting record. So what does whether you're registered to vote or not have to do with signing up for Obamacare? I called Connect today and advised them I'm receiving no subsidies and do not feel I should be required to send this information to them. And if they wanted this information, I file taxes every year and would be easily assessed. In regards to voter registration, I advise this has nothing to do with health care registration, and I strongly object to language linking the two in the letter. Any clear-thinking person would be upset at our state government trying to bring voter registration into this mess, not to mention personnel information they should not need since no subsidies are involved. The stories go on and on. Lana Lynch from Brandenburg. My out-of-pocket expenses for my family of 5 went from $1,500 a year to $7,000 a year. The best policy that is available by my employer has a $7,000 out-of-pocket a year provision, and she works for a very large health care provider. Janine Gentry from Elkron. We're covered under my husband's policy through his employer. We have not found out exactly how much the premium is going to rise, but have been told to expect between 150 and 300% increase per paycheck. We do know for certain that our deductible will rise from $5,000 annually to $8,500 annually. Ann Nauer from Shepherdsville. I received my insurance papers from United Healthcare and found that my premiums had risen from $214 to $480 a month. I only get $1,181 in Social Security a month. That's after my Medicare payment. So I went online to see if I could get my husband signed up for this ACA insurance. I filled out the information, but was told that what I stated for our income was incorrect, and that I needed to send in proof of my income. Then they insisted that we fill out this form about voter registration. Voter registration. We're already registered to vote and felt this was completely unnecessary. The form did have a spot that stated we were already registered, but I just don't trust the website, so we declined. We got forms in the mail anyway. I'm just going to stick with my old insurance and pay the higher premiums because I know what it covers. I have Medicare and United Healthcare. I've kept this insurance because of my husband, who is also retired but not covered under any other insurance. My insurance came from my job that I had before I retired as part of a retirement package. And Mike Kahn from Prestonsburg, and I might say Prestonsburg is in eastern Kentucky in the heart of Appalachia, which is also suffering a depression as a result of this administration's war on coal. So this person who corresponded with me is also in the middle of a depression, depression-riddled part of my state, created also by the Obama administration. Here's what he said. A policy that has similar coverage to what we had would cost us around $1,100 a month. This is a 100% increase for me and my wife. I was informed by the individual, I guess, that was helping me find coverage, that it was because we live in eastern Kentucky, and our insurance company apparently is not available there. He says, we're not going to pay that. Don't blame him. Giselle Martino of Prospect. My premium health care at premium cost to me is being canceled. I paid a very high premium to have a major medical plan. I'm now forced into the exchange for a lesser plan with more exclusions and higher deductibles. I will most likely never reach these deductibles, so how does this help me? I'm basically paying into a plan for others. If I must pay for my higher tier heart drugs anyway, why should I bother with the health plan? What a disappointment this administration has caused. Cheryl Russell from Owensboro. We got a letter from our insurance company saying our current policy will not meet the Affordable Care Act, which means it'll go away. According to our insurance company, we will have to take pediatric dental and vision insurance. Pediatric dental and vision insurance. We don't have any kids, she said. They said it was because of Obamacare. They're allowing us to keep our plan until December 2014 for an additional $38 more a month so we can find another plan. Another plan through this company that we had our whole life will cost us at least $900 to $1,000 a month. It will cost us over $150 more a month, plus, listen to this, plus our deductible goes up to $5,700. I sent you a message last week, she says to me, I'm sending this again, please keep taking a stand against Obamacare. Our president lied to us, she said. Our president lied to us. Not only are we going to lose our insurance, but when we go to a different policy, we have to pay more. We'll never be able to retire. We are 58 and 56 years old. We will have to work the rest of our lives just to pay for our own insurance. The company we work for doesn't provide it. This isn't fair, and it isn't right. Thanks for taking a stand for all of us who are in Kentucky. So, Mr. President, in wrapping up my remarks, here's the situation. On Christmas Eve 2009, on a straight party line vote, 60 Democrats voting for, 40 Republicans voting against, the administration jammed through a 2,700-page rewrite of 16% of our economy. The goal, one could argue, was a noble goal, that of trying to reduce the number of uninsured in America from an estimated group of about 45 million Americans. The first problem with this particular solution is that CRS, Congressional Research Service, which doesn't work for either Republicans or Democrats, says when all's said and done, you're still going to have 30 million uninsured. So what's the cost-benefit ratio of taking $1 trillion out of the providers of health care, roughly $750 billion in reductions, cuts to hospitals, home health care, nursing homes, and the like, hospice, billions of dollars in taxes on medical devices, taxes on health insurance premiums kicking in the first of the year, $1 trillion impact on the providers of health care. And over on the consumer side, I've just given you a series of stories about how it impacts the consumers of health care. Higher premiums, higher deductibles, lost jobs, record number of part-time employees, wreaking havoc with the American economy from the consumers of health care and on the providers of health care, all to reduce the number of uninsured from 45 to 30 million. This has to be the worst cost-benefit ratio in the history of American government. All of this disruption, this catastrophic impact on 16% of our economy in order to make a marginal reduction in the number of uninsured. This has to be the biggest mistake in modern times. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to think of a single bigger mistake the federal government's made, and it's made some whoppers over the years. I'm hard-pressed to think of a single example that comes anywhere close to this. A gargantuan, massive mistake, which has had a lot to do with the fact that we've had such a tepid recovery in our country after a deep recession. You know, the pattern since World War II has been the deeper the recession, the quicker the bounce back, until this one. Deep recession, tepid recovery. The government itself is the reason for that. Massive overregulation, an army of regulators who will now have their work sped through the D.C. Circuit Court that believe if you're making a profit, you're up to no good. You're obviously cheating your customers, mistreating your employees. They're here to help you. This massive bureaucratic overreach has definitely slowed our recovery. So I hope the American people will give us an opportunity in the not-too-distant future to pull this thing out root and branch and start over and do it right. And, Mr. President, I think that concludes my time, and I believe that Senator Rockefeller is here, so I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from West Virginia.
I want to speak about an issue of great importance to the national security of the United States.